The Galactic Council chamber hummed with nervous energy as Ambassador Zethkar of the Veltari Confederation stood before the assembled representatives. His crystalline form caught the artificial light, refracting it into nervous patterns that betrayed his species' emotional state. Around him, delegates from 47 different worlds shifted in their various atmospheric suits and environmental pods, all united by a single, terrifying reality. The Hive was coming. Honored representatives. Zethkar's voice resonated through the translation matrix, carrying undertones that spoke of desperation barely held in check. The latest intelligence confirms what we have feared. The Devourer Hive has consumed the Outer Rim colonies. 7 billion souls gone. Their bioships now number in the hundreds of thousands, and they move toward the core worlds. A ripple of distress passed through the chamber. The Manthari delegates' feathers rustled in what their species considered the equivalent of terrified sobbing. The aquatic depth swimmers' representative had gone completely pale, their bioluminescent organs flickering erratically. How long? The question came from General Cross, the hegemony's military commander. His 4 arms were crossed in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both authority and helplessness. The hegemony boasted the largest fleet in known space, yet even they trembled before the approaching swarm. 6 months, Zethkar replied. Perhaps less. The Hive's advanced scouts have already been detected in the Meridian sector. They're not just consuming populations anymore. They're adapting our technology, integrating our weapons systems into their bioships. Every victory they achieve makes them stronger. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates began speaking simultaneously in dozens of languages, their words creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to process. Some called for immediate evacuation of the core worlds. Others demanded a last stand. A few suggested surrender, hoping the Hive might show mercy to those who submitted willingly. Silence. The voice that cut through the noise belonged to Elder Misthani, the ancient ethereal who served as the council's spiritual advisor. Despite her species' pacifist nature, her presence commanded respect from warrior races and merchant guilds alike. There may yet be hope. The chamber quieted, all attention focused on the floating figure wrapped in gossamer robes that seemed to shift between dimensions. The ethereals were among the oldest spacefaring races, their wisdom sought by all who encountered them. "Speak, Elder," Zethkar said, his crystalline form brightening with desperate hope. "In our archives," Misthani began, her voice carrying the weight of millennia, "there are references to a species that might aid us. They are young by galactic standards, having achieved interstellar travel only recently. Yet they possess certain qualities that could prove decisive in our current crisis." General Cross leaned forward. "What kind of qualities?" "They are native to what our classification system designates as a Class 12 death world, the highest classification we have on record. Their planet experiences regular mass extinction events, yet they have not only survived but thrived. They have endured ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and countless other catastrophes. They are, in essence, evolution's answer to the question of how life persists in the face of constant adversity." The Manthari delegate's feathers had stopped rustling. "You speak of humans." A collective intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Humanity was known to the Galactic Council, though they had never been invited to join. Most species considered them an anomaly, a race that had developed advanced technology while retaining the brutal survival instincts of their Death World origins. They were studied from afar, approached with extreme caution, and generally avoided. "Yes," Misthani confirmed. "The humans of Terra. They call themselves the most peaceful species in known space. Yet their entire history is written in the blood of their own kind. They have waged wars of unimaginable scale for resources, ideology, territory, and sometimes for no reason other than ancient grievances. They have created weapons capable of sterilizing their own world multiple times over, then somehow found the wisdom not to use them. But they've never faced anything like the Hive," protested the Veltari trade representative. "The Hive doesn't wage war as we understand it. They simply consume. They adapt. They multiply. No strategy, no honor, no mercy, just endless hunger. Perhaps, Miss Tani said softly. But consider this. Humans are the only species we know of that regularly fights their own natural environment and wins. Their world tries to kill them daily through disease, disaster, and predation. Yet they have not merely survived. They have conquered their planet so thoroughly that they now worry about preserving the very dangers that forged them. Captain Relthok of the Void Rangers had remained silent throughout the discussion, but now she spoke. Her species, the Kron, were among the most militaristic in the galaxy, yet even they had never attempted to recruit humans into their ranks. I have observed human military exercises, she said, her voice carrying the grating tones of her people. They practice scenarios that we would classify as suicide missions. They train for situations where victory requires acceptable losses of up to 90% of their forces. And they volunteer for these exercises enthusiastically. Savagery, muttered one of the delegates. No, relto directive. Dedication. They understand something that we have forgotten in our millions of years of civilization. Sometimes survival requires sacrifice. Sometimes victory demands that the impossible becomes merely improbable. Zethkar's form had been steadily brightening as the discussion continued, his species' equivalent of rising hope. Do we have any formal diplomatic channels with humanity? Limited contact through trade intermediaries, replied the Council's Secretary General, a placid bovine whose species specialized in bureaucracy. They maintained several embassies and neutral stations along the rim, primarily for scientific exchange and mineral rights negotiations. However, they have consistently declined invitations to join the Galactic Council. They claim they're not ready, added Miss Tani, that they need more time to mature as a species before taking on galactic responsibilities. A curious form of humility from a race that has never lost a war against non-human opponents. General Cross's four arms gestured in what his people called the weighing of options. What exactly are you proposing, Elder? That we invite these Deathworlders to fight our battles for us? That we ask them to face a threat that has destroyed fleets 100 times more advanced than anything they possess? I propose, Ms. Tani said, her form beginning to fade as her attention shifted to other dimensions, that we ask them to do what they do best, to survive, to endure, to find a way forward when all reasonable paths have been exhausted. The hive consumes civilizations, yes. But humans have survived worse odds. They have faced extinction dozens of times and somehow emerged stronger. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. They were the advanced species, the ones with energy weapons, force fields, and faster-than-light travel. They commanded vast fleets and could reshape matter at the molecular level. Yet here they sat, preparing to ask help from a species that still used chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons for many of their military applications. There is another factor to consider, added Dr. Nithera, the Council's chief xenobiologist. Her insectoid form twitched as she spoke, a sign of intense calculation among her people. The hive's primary advantage is adaptation. They study their enemies, learn from defeats, and modify their approach accordingly. But humans are uniquely unpredictable. Their tactical doctrine seems to rely on doing the unexpected, even when it defies logical analysis. You mean they're insane, said the Manthari delegate. I mean they're creative, Dr. Nithera corrected. Lethally, brilliantly creative. They weaponize concepts that other species consider purely theoretical. They turn defensive technologies into offensive ones. They find ways to make weakness into strength. The hive adapts to known patterns of behavior. But humans specialize in creating new patterns. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form had reached full brightness, casting rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. Then it's decided. We make the appeal. We contact the human governments and request their aid. All of them, asked the Secretary General. Human political structure is fragmented. They maintain over 200 separate nation-states, plus various colonial governments and corporate entities. Their decision-making process could take months. "We don't have months," General Cross pointed out grimly. Elder Mistani's voice drifted back from whatever dimension her consciousness had touched. "Then, we appeal to their nature rather than their governments. Humans respond to certain stimuli with remarkable consistency. Challenge them. Threaten something they care about. Give them an enemy worthy of their accumulated rage. You want us to provoke them?" The depth swimmer's representative had recovered enough color to speak, though their voice still carried undertones of fear. "I want us to present them with a truth they cannot ignore," Mistani replied. "The Hive is not just another threat. It is the ultimate challenge to everything humans have built, everything they represent. It is a force of pure entropy seeking to reduce all complexity to simple consumption. For a species that has spent its entire existence fighting entropy in all its forms, the Hive represents the final examination." Captain Relthok's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "When do we make contact?" "Immediately," Zethkar decided. "We send envoys to their nearest embassy station. We present our case formally, officially, and completely. We tell them everything. The scope of the threat, our own failed attempts to resist, the likely consequences if the Hive continues unchecked." "And if they refuse?" asked the Secretary General. "Then we evacuate what populations we can and hope the Hive finds us unappetizing enough to ignore," General Cross said flatly. "But somehow, I don't think they'll refuse." "Why?" The question came from several delegates simultaneously. Relthok answered, her voice carrying an odd note of what might have been respect. "Because humans have a saying, when you're going through hell, keep going. The Hive isn't just another enemy to them. It's hell itself. And, in my experience, humans don't run from hell. They march through it, plant a flag on the other side, and then figure out how to turn it into a vacation destination." The chamber erupted in what passed for laughter among species that had spent the last several hours contemplating their own extinction. It was nervous, desperate laughter, but it carried a note of hope that hadn't been present when the session began. As the delegates began to file out, preparing to send word to their respective governments about the unprecedented decision to request aid from Deathworlders, Elder Mistani's voice whispered through the chamber one final time. "Remember this moment," she said. "Today, civilization appealed to chaos. Today, order asked disorder for salvation. The universe has a sense of irony, and I suspect we are about to become intimately acquainted with it." The chamber fell empty, but the lights remained on, casting their harsh illumination over seats that might never be filled again. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the Hive continued its advance, unaware that its next meal had just decided to add a very dangerous spice to the recipe. In the silence that followed, only the soft hum of life support systems could be heard, the mechanical heartbeat of a civilization holding its breath, waiting to see if salvation would come from the most unexpected of sources. The appeal had been made. Now came the waiting, and the hope that when Deathworlders answered, it would be with the fury that had made them legendary throughout a galaxy that feared and avoided them in equal measure. The universe was about to discover why Earth was classified as the most dangerous planet in known space, and why its children had never learned to surrender. The human embassy on Nexus Station was an unremarkable collection of prefabricated modules tucked into one of the station's less prestigious sectors. Unlike the elaborate crystal spires of the Veltari diplomatic complex or the flowing organic architecture of the Manthari Quarter, the human facility looked exactly like what it was, a functional space designed by a species that prioritized efficiency over aesthetics. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in the embassy's secure communications chamber, watching the incoming priority transmission with a mixture of professional curiosity and personal concern. In her 15 years of diplomatic service, she had never received a formal request for audience from the full Galactic Council. Most species preferred to maintain their distance from humanity, conducting necessary business through intermediaries and keeping interactions to an absolute minimum. The transmission resolved into the image of Ambassador Zethkar, his crystalline form displaying the deep blue patterns that indicated extreme urgency among his people. Behind him, she could make out several other figures. The imposing bulk of General Cross, the ethereal shimmer of Elder Mistani, and the sharp angles of Captain Relthok. Ambassador Chun, Zethkar began, his voice carrying undertones that made the translation matrix work overtime to convey the emotional context. I bring greetings from the Galactic Council and a matter of utmost importance to both our civilizations. Sarah had been expecting a routine trade dispute or perhaps another formal complaint about human expansion into the Rim territories. What she received instead was a detailed briefing on an enemy so terrible that it had united 47 different species in desperate alliance. The Hive, she repeated slowly, reviewing the tactical data on her secondary screens. The numbers were staggering. Entire star systems consumed, billions of sentient beings absorbed into the collective mass, and a growing fleet of bioships that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. You're certain this data is accurate? Unfortunately, yes, General Cross interjected, his four arms spreading in a gesture that somehow conveyed both military precision and profound grief. We have lost 17 reconnaissance fleets attempting to gather intelligence. The few survivors all report the same thing. The Hive doesn't just destroy, it learns. Every ship they capture, every technology they encounter, becomes part of their arsenal. Sarah turned to her aide, Commander Jake Morrison, a former Space Force officer whose scarred face told stories of humanity's brief but violent encounters with hostile alien life during their early expansion phase. His expression was thoughtful, analytical, the look of a soldier evaluating a tactical problem. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if these numbers are accurate, we're looking at an exponential threat. Each victory makes them stronger, and they're already operating beyond anything in our current defensive capabilities. Which brings us to our request." Elder Mistani's voice drifted into the conversation with the otherworldly quality that marked her species. "We come to you not as superiors seeking aid from a lesser civilization, but as fellow sentients facing extinction. We have studied your species extensively, Ambassador Chun. Your people possess qualities that make them uniquely suited to face this particular threat." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of pride and wariness. Humans had earned a reputation in galactic society, but it wasn't necessarily a reputation they were comfortable with. What qualities would those be, Elder? Adaptability under pressure, creative problem-solving in impossible situations, and, perhaps most importantly, an apparent inability to recognize when you should surrender. Captain Relthok's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned to recognize as approval. Your species has faced extinction multiple times in your planet's history. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, events that would have ended most civilizations. Yet you survived. More than survived, you learned to thrive in environments that would kill most galactic species within hours. "You're asking us to fight your war for you," Sarah said bluntly, cutting through the diplomatic niceties. It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact. "No," Zethkar replied, his crystalline form shifting to patterns that indicated absolute sincerity. "We're asking you to fight with us, to bring your expertise in surviving the impossible and apply it to a threat that our own civilizations cannot comprehend." Sarah exchanged glances with Commander Morrison. The request was unprecedented, but so was the threat. "I'll need to consult with Earth Command and the Colonial Authority. A decision of this magnitude." "Ambassador," Elder Mistani interrupted gently, "while your formal governmental processes proceed, might we suggest a more immediate response? The Hive's advanced scouts have already penetrated the Meridian sector. We estimate 6 months before their main force reaches the core worlds." "6 months," Morrison muttered. "That's barely enough time to mobilize a proper response, even if every human government agreed immediately. Which is why," General Cross said, "we propose a joint military expedition, a combined force of human and galactic vessels to engage the Hive's advance elements. Consider it a field test of human tactical doctrine against this particular enemy. Sarah's diplomatic training warred with her instinctive understanding of her own species. Humans didn't back down from fights, especially fights that seemed impossible to win. But this was bigger than any conflict in human history, and the consequences of failure were literally unimaginable. "What kind of forces are we talking about?" she asked. Captain Relthok consulted a tactical display. The hegemony can contribute approximately 50,000 vessels of various classifications. The Confederation offers their most advanced sensor arrays and defensive technologies. The Ethereals provide strategic coordination and long-range intelligence gathering capabilities. And from humanity? Whatever you can spare, Zethkar said simply. We understand that your total fleet strength is perhaps 500 vessels, most of them designed for system defense rather than extended campaigns. But we're not asking you to match our numbers. We're asking you to do what you do best. Morrison leaned forward. Which is? Surprise the enemy, General Cross replied. In our analysis of human military history, your most decisive victories came not from superior firepower or technology, but from tactics that your enemies couldn't anticipate. You weaponized the unexpected. Sarah nodded slowly. It was true, though she suspected the galactic species didn't fully understand the implications of what they were asking. Human military doctrine had evolved in the crucible of constant warfare, refined by species-wide conflicts that had pushed tactical innovation to its absolute limits. They didn't fight fair, they fought to win. I'll need to speak with Admiral Reyes at Terra Command and Fleet Admiral Okafor with the Colonial Defense Force, she said finally. But I can tell you right now what their response is likely to be. Which is? Sarah smiled, and for a moment the assembled alien representatives caught a glimpse of something that made them understand why humanity had earned its fearsome reputation. They're going to want to know why you waited so long to ask. The transmission ended with promises of rapid communication and emergency sessions of various human governing bodies. As the alien representatives faded from the screen, Sarah turned to Morrison with an expression that mixed anticipation with concern. Jake, sent a priority flash to Admiral Reyes. Copy to all colonial governors and the Security Council. Use authentication code Black Phoenix. Tell them we have a potential extinction-level threat and possible galactic alliance opportunity. Morrison's fingers flew over his console. Authentication confirmed. Message transmitted. Admiral Reyes is requesting immediate video conference. The screen flickered back to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Elena Reyes, the steel-haired woman who commanded Earth's home defense fleet. Behind her, Sarah could make out the controlled chaos of Terra Command's primary operations center. Sarah, the Admiral said without preamble, I've been monitoring your conversation with the galactic representatives. Is this legitimate? As far as I can determine, yes. The threat assessment data checks out, and the desperation in their voices was genuine. Admiral, they're scared. These are species that consider us barely civilized, and they're asking for our help. Admiral Reyes was quiet for several moments, her expression cycling through emotions that Sarah recognized from her own military service. Analysis, concern, and, finally, a grim determination that marked professional soldiers facing an unavoidable conflict. How long before we get official word from the civilian authorities? The Admiral asked. The Security Council is meeting in emergency session. The Colonial Authority is polling their governors. Best case scenario, we'll have formal authorization within 72 hours. And worst case, political gridlock while the hive gets stronger. Admiral Reyes nodded grimly. Jake, you still have contacts in Special Operations Command? Morrison straightened. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because if we're going to do this, we need to start preparing immediately. And I have a feeling that our new galactic allies have no idea what they've actually asked for. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Admiral, Sarah, these species have been spacefaring for millions of years. They've developed warfare into an elegant science with rules and protocols and established patterns of behavior. They fight wars like chess matches, strategic, predictable, civilized. And we don't. We fight wars like we're drowning, Admiral Reyes said flatly. We use every weapon available, break every rule that gets in our way, and keep fighting long past the point where any rational being would surrender. They think they want our help. What they actually want is to unleash humanity on their enemies, and hope we're pointed in the right direction when we start destroying everything in sight. Morrison's scarred face creased in what might have been a smile. Ma'am, speaking as someone who's seen human military doctrine in action, this hive might be in for a very unpleasant surprise. Maybe, Admiral Reyes acknowledged. But remember, we're not just representing humanity in this conflict. We're setting the precedent for how the galaxy sees us for generations to come. If we succeed, we become major players in galactic politics. If we fail, we won't fail, Sarah said with quiet conviction. We can't afford to. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. Sarah, I want you to coordinate with your galactic contacts. Find out everything you can about this hive, their capabilities, their weaknesses, their psychological profile, if they have one. Jake, start reaching out to our people. Quietly. I want to know what assets we can mobilize if this gets official approval. And if it doesn't get approval? Morrison asked. Admiral Reyes was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had sworn an oath to protect humanity, regardless of political considerations. Then, we'll have to decide whether we're willing to watch 47 civilizations die, while politicians debate the finer points of non-interference treaties. The screen went dark, leaving Sarah and Morrison alone with the magnitude of what had just been proposed. Through the embassy's main viewport, they could see the vast bulk of Nexus Station rotating slowly against the star field, its lights representing thousands of species conducting the ordinary business of galactic civilization. Soon, if the reports were accurate, the hive would arrive to consume it all. The only question was whether humanity would stand with the galaxy against the darkness or watch from the sidelines as entropy claimed another victory. Looking at Morrison's grim expression, Sarah suspected she already knew the answer. Humans had never been good at standing on the sidelines, especially when the alternative was extinction. The appeal had been made, and now came the hard part, convincing a species bred for warfare that this particular fight was worth everything they could give. But, as Sarah began drafting her report to the Security Council, she found herself thinking about the alien representative's words. They had asked for help from Deathworlders. They were about to discover that there was a reason Earth was the most dangerous planet in known space, and why its children had conquered every environment their world could throw at them. The hive thought it was the ultimate predator. It was about to meet something far worse, humanity with a cause. The emergency session of Earth's Security Council had been in progress for 18 hours when the final vote was called. In the secure conference room beneath Geneva, representatives from every major human government and corporation sat around a holographic display showing the known positions of the hive's advance forces. The red markers had moved noticeably closer to inhabited systems since the session began. Secretary General Maria Santos looked exhausted as she called for order. The motion before us is clear: to commit Earth's military forces to a joint operation with the Galactic Council against the entity known as the Hive. All in favor. One by one, the hands rose. The vote wasn't unanimous. The Pacific Trade Alliance had abstained, citing concerns about committing their limited forces to an alien conflict, but it was overwhelming. Humanity would fight. Admiral Reyes watched the proceedings from her command center in orbit, surrounded by displays showing the rapid mobilization of human forces across 3-star systems. In the past 48 hours, humanity had accomplished what most galactic species would have required months to coordinate: a complete restructuring of their defensive posture to support offensive operations in unknown space. Admiral, her aide reported, the Galactic Council has transmitted rendezvous coordinates. They're assembling the combined fleet in the Kepler 442 system. How long to reach the assembly point? For our fastest ships, 36 hours. The main battle group will need at least 60 hours to arrive with full supplies and support vessels. Admiral Reyes nodded, studying the tactical projections. Humanity's contribution to the Alliance would be modest by galactic standards, 150 ships, ranging from the massive dreadnought HMS Indomitable down to the fast attack corvettes that had proven so effective in recent skirmishes with pirates and raiders. But every human vessel had been designed with one fundamental principle: maximum lethality per unit mass. Signal Fleet Admiral Okafor on the Indomitable. Tell her she has the honor of representing humanity at first contact with our new allies. Meanwhile, in the Kepler 442 system, the assembled galactic fleet was an impressive sight. Nearly 50,000 vessels hung in formation, their varied designs reflecting the diversity of the Alliance. Crystalline Veltari ships that looked like frozen lightning. Organic Manthari vessels that seemed to breathe in the vacuum of space. The geometric precision of hegemony battleships, each one capable of sterilizing a planet. Admiral Veltaron of the Hegemony 4th Fleet watched his sensors with growing anticipation. The humans were late, but that was understandable given their limited faster-than-light capabilities. What concerned him more was the tactical briefing he had received about human military doctrine. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "incoming FDL signatures. Configuration matches human vessel profiles." The fleet that dropped out of hyperspace was smaller than expected, but there was something about their formation that made experienced military officers take notice. The human ships moved with the fluid precision of a combat unit that had trained together extensively. More importantly, they had arranged themselves not in the traditional diplomatic formation, a defensive sphere with the flagship at center, but in what could only be described as an attack formation. Fleet Admiral Amara Okafor stood on the bridge of HMS Indomitable, studying the massive alien fleet spread before them. At 53, she was one of humanity's youngest fleet commanders, a veteran of the Rim Wars who had earned her reputation fighting off corporate raiders and hostile alien encounters in the outer colonies. "Impressive," commented her tactical officer, Commander Sarah Kim. "I count at least 12 different ship designs I've never seen before." "Keep scanning," Admiral Okafor ordered. "I want full tactical profiles of every vessel in this fleet. If we're going to fight alongside them, we need to know their capabilities." The communication from the Allied fleet came through standard diplomatic channels, but the content was anything but routine. Admiral Veltaron's four-armed form filled the main screen, his expression carefully neutral. "Admiral Okafor, welcome to the Alliance fleet. Your ships will be integrated into our battle formation according to standard galactic military protocols. Please transmit your tactical specifications so our strategists can determine optimal positioning." Admiral Okafor exchanged glances with her staff. The request was reasonable, but something in the alien commander's tone suggested he expected humans to play a supporting role in the coming battle. "Admiral Veltron," she replied carefully, "we appreciate the welcome. However, we'd like to suggest an alternative approach to tactical integration. Rather than fitting our ships into your existing formation, we propose a coordinated but independent operational structure." The silence that followed was telling. Through the communication link, Admiral Okafor could see other alien officers gathering behind Admiral Veltron, their body language suggesting confusion and perhaps concern. "Admiral," Veltron said finally, "our tactical doctrine has been refined over millions of years of warfare. Our formation patterns are mathematically optimized for maximum combat effectiveness while minimizing losses. Surely your commanders would benefit from our experience." Commander Kim leaned closer to Admiral Okafor. "Ma'am, I don't think he understands what we're proposing." Admiral Okafor nodded slightly. "Admiral Veltaron, we're not questioning your tactical expertise, but human military doctrine operates on different principles than what you've described. We don't optimize for minimum losses, we optimize for maximum impact on the enemy." "I don't understand the distinction." Admiral Okafor paused, considering how to explain concepts that were fundamental to human military thinking, but apparently alien to galactic warfare. "Admiral, may I ask how your fleet typically engages enemy forces?" "Standard protocol involves establishing optimal range, coordinating defensive screens, and maintaining formation integrity while delivering sustained firepower. The objective is to inflict maximum damage while preserving our own forces for continued operations. And if the enemy adapts to your tactics, we adjust our formation parameters and weapon frequencies according to established counter-adaptation protocols. Admiral Okafor felt a chill run down her spine. The galactic approach to warfare was sophisticated, elegant, and utterly predictable. Against an enemy like the Hive, which learned from every encounter, it was also potentially suicidal. "Admiral," she said slowly, "human tactical doctrine assumes the enemy will adapt to our strategies. So we design our strategies to be fundamentally unpredictable. We call it controlled chaos." The alien officers behind Admiral Veltron were now openly discussing among themselves in their various languages. Admiral Okafor could see the translation matrices working overtime to process what was clearly an animated debate. Admiral Okafor came a new voice, and Admiral Okafor recognized Elder Misthani from the diplomatic briefings. "Perhaps you could provide an example of this controlled chaos approach?" Admiral Okafor smiled grimly. "Elder, in human military history, some of our most decisive victories came from tactics that violated every principle of sound military strategy. We've won battles by retreating into impossible terrain, by dividing our forces in the face of superior enemies, and by attacking when any rational commander would choose to defend." "That sounds—" Admiral Velteron paused, searching for words. "Inefficient. It's terrifying," Commander Kim interjected. "Ma'am, maybe we should show them the Stalingrad files or the Pacific Island campaigns, or the point," Admiral Okafor interrupted diplomatically, "is that human tactics are designed to create psychological as well as physical effects on the enemy. We don't just want to destroy enemy ships. We want to make them afraid to fight us." Elder Misthani's ethereal form shimmered with what might have been approval. "And you believe this approach will be effective against the Hive?" "I believe the Hive expects to face opponents who fight like rational beings. We don't." The debate that followed lasted 6 hours and involved representatives from every major species in the Alliance. Human tactical doctrine was dissected, analyzed, and subjected to computer simulations that tried to predict its effectiveness against Hive forces. The results were troubling, not because human tactics failed, but because they succeeded in ways that violated fundamental assumptions about space combat. According to our models, Dr. Nithera reported to the assembled command staff, human tactical approaches result in casualty rates that would be considered unacceptable by any rational military force. However, they also result in enemy casualty rates that exceed anything in our combat databases. General Cross gestured with all 4 arms in a pattern that indicated deep concern. "The humans are proposing tactics that assume massive losses in exchange for disproportionate damage to the enemy. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is mutual annihilation with a preference for taking the enemy down first," which, Elder Misthani observed, may be exactly what we need against an enemy that views warfare as a feeding opportunity rather than a strategic exercise. The final decision came from an unexpected source. Captain Relthok, who had remained silent throughout most of the debate, suddenly spoke up. "I volunteer to command the first joint operation," she said. "My ship and 3 human vessels operating under combined tactical doctrine. If the humans are correct about their approach, we'll know within hours. If they're wrong, you'll be dead," Admiral Veltron pointed out. "Yes, but we'll have learned something valuable about fighting the Hive, and that information might save the rest of the fleet." Admiral Okafor felt a surge of respect for the alien commander. "Captain Relthok, are you certain about this?" "Admiral Okafor, my species has been warriors for thousands of years. We understand courage, sacrifice, and the price of victory. What we don't understand is how to fight an enemy that learns from our every move. If human tactical doctrine can solve that problem, then I'm willing to risk everything to test it." The plan that emerged was elegantly simple. Captain Relthok's heavy cruiser would join 3 human vessels, a destroyer, a frigate, and one of the new stealth corvettes, in a reconnaissance and force against a Hive scout flotilla that had been detected in the outer system. The mission had two objectives: gather intelligence on Hive capabilities and test the effectiveness of combined human-alien tactics. As the mixed squadron prepared to depart, Admiral Okafor found herself on the bridge of HMS Indomitable, watching the four ships accelerate toward the edge of the system. The human vessels moved with their characteristic aggressive positioning, while Captain Relthok's cruiser maintained a more traditional formation stance. "Admiral," Commander Kim said quietly, "what if we're wrong? What if human tactics don't work against an enemy like this?" Admiral Okafor was quiet for a long moment, watching the mixed squadron disappear into the darkness between stars. "Sarah, human tactics work because they're based on a fundamental truth that most civilized species have forgotten. Sometimes the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than the thing trying to kill you. And if the Hive is more dangerous than us..." Admiral Okafor's expression hardened. "Then, we learn to be more dangerous than we've ever been before. The galaxy asked for Deathworlders, Sarah. They're about to find out what that actually means." In the cold void between stars, for ships raced toward an encounter that would determine not just the fate of their crews, but the future of warfare in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. Behind them, 50,000 vessels waited for word of whether humanity's reputation as the most dangerous species in known space was about to be tested against the ultimate enemy. The Hive was still advancing, consuming everything in its path. But for the first time since the crisis began, they were about to encounter prey that had evolved to be predators. Humans who had learned to turn their own mortality into a weapon that even death itself might fear. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the destroyer HMS Defiant, watching the tactical display as her mixed squadron approached the outer edge of the system where Hive scouts had been detected. Beside her ship, the Kron heavy cruiser Bloodfang maintained perfect formation, while the frigate HMS Relentless and the stealth corvette Ghost Rider moved in coordinated patterns that looked almost like a dance. "Contact," reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. "Multiple signatures bearing 27 Mark 14. Configuration unknown. They're not matching any ships in our databases." Captain Relthok's image appeared on the communication screen, her mandibles clicking in what Vasquez had learned was the Kron equivalent of grim satisfaction. "Captain Vasquez, my sensors confirm the readings. 12 vessels, organic composition, power signatures unlike anything in our experience. They appear to be growing." "Growing?" Vasquez queried, even as her own sensors confirmed the impossible readings. The Hive ships were actually increasing in size as they watched, absorbing matter from the asteroid field they were moving through and incorporating it into their hulls. "Captain," Torres called out, "the lead ship just changed course. They're heading directly for us." On the tactical display, the Hive formation was moving with purpose rather than the random patterns of a normal patrol. More troubling, their acceleration was increasing exponentially, suggesting they had detected the squadron despite operating at maximum stealth. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual," Vasquez broadcast on the tactical channel. "Hive forces have detected us and are moving to intercept. Time to first contact estimated at 14 minutes. Captain Relthok, are you ready to see human tactics in action?" "I confess to considerable curiosity," came the alien commander's response. "Your battle plan appears to violate several fundamental principles of small unit tactics." Vasquez smiled grimly. "Captain, human military doctrine assumes that fundamental principles are suggestions." Ghost Rider, execute Maneuver 7. The stealth corvette vanished from sensors as it activated its full stealth suite and began accelerating on a trajectory that would take it well outside the engagement zone. To any rational observer, it looked like one of the human ships was abandoning the fight before it began. "Captain Vasquez," Relthok's voice carried undertones of confusion. "Your corvette appears to be withdrawing from the battle area." "Negative, Captain. Ghost Rider is moving to optimal firing position. In human tactics, we call this aggressive repositioning." Before Relthok could respond, the Hive ships opened fire. The weapons they used defied classification. Streams of some kind of energy that seemed to eat through space itself. leaving trails of absolute darkness in their wake. One beam passed close enough to Defiant that the ship's hull plating actually began to dissolve. Evasive maneuvers, Vasquez ordered. All ships, execute pattern Delta 7. What happened next would have been impossible to explain to anyone trained in conventional space tactics. Instead of maintaining formation and returning coordinated fire, the human ships scattered in apparently random directions while accelerating at rates that should have killed their crews from the gravitational stress. Defiant dove below the engagement plane while spinning along its central axis. Relentless suddenly reversed course and began flying backward while firing its forward weapons. And somewhere in the chaos, Ghost Rider had simply vanished. Captain Relthok found herself trying to follow the human movements while engaging the leading Hive ships with conventional tactics. Her cruiser's weapons were more powerful than anything the humans carried, but she quickly realized that raw firepower was not the primary factor in this engagement. Captain, her tactical officer reported, the Hive ships are adapting their targeting algorithms. They've compensated for our beam frequency and are adjusting their defensive screens accordingly. Understood. Rotate through weapon frequencies according to standard protocol. But even as Relthok's ship adapted its tactics, she noticed something disturbing. The Hive ships were completely ignoring her vessel and concentrating their fire on the human ships. More troubling, their adaptation rate was far beyond anything in her experience. They were modifying their tactics in real time, learning from each engagement. Human vessels, she broadcast. The enemy is adapting faster than our models predicted. Recommend immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Negative, Captain Relthok, came Vasquez's voice, strangely calm despite the fact that her ship was currently flying through a barrage of weapons fire that was dissolving chunks of her hull. We're just getting started. Ghost Rider, you have a solution? Affirmative, Defiant. Target locked and tracking. Initiating Maneuver 12. Relthok's sensors suddenly detected the Corvette, not where she expected it to be in the engagement zone, but somehow positioned above the Hive formation at a range that should have been impossible to achieve in the time available. More confusing, the small ship was accelerating directly toward the largest Hive vessel at a velocity that would result in collision within seconds. Captain Vasquez, Relthok called out urgently. Your Corvette is on a collision course with the enemy flagship. Confirmed, Captain. Ghost Rider is executing a kinetic strike. That's suicide. No, Captain. That's Tuesday. The Corvette struck the Hive flagship at nearly 30% of light speed, its mass converted to pure energy by the ship's experimental drives just before impact. The resulting explosion vaporized the flagship and severely damaged 3 other Hive vessels. But what happened next defied every principle of known physics. Instead of dying, the destroyed Hive ships began to regenerate, pulling matter and energy from their damaged companions. Within minutes, they were not only whole again, but apparently stronger than before. Impossible, Relthok whispered. Nothing can survive that level of destruction. Captain, Vasquez's voice came across the communication channel. You're thinking like a civilized being. The Hive doesn't follow civilized rules. Torres, analysis on those regeneration patterns. Captain, they're not actually regenerating. They're transferring damaged components to intact ships and cannibalizing the weakest vessels to repair the strongest. It's like they're a single organism instead of individual ships. Understood. Relentless. Initiate Maneuver 15. Let's see how they adapt when we stop trying to destroy them and start trying to drive them insane. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded galactic history. The human ships began executing maneuvers that seemed designed not to win the engagement, but to create maximum confusion and psychological pressure. They fired at empty space, accelerated toward targets, and then veered off at the last second, and used their own ship systems in ways that violated basic engineering principles. Defiant actually jettisoned its main reactor while under fire, using the resulting explosion as cover to launch boarding pods at the nearest Hive ship. The pods themselves were revealed to be converted mining charges that burrowed into the alien hull and began systematically destroying critical systems from the inside. Relentless began broadcasting human music, death metal at maximum volume across all frequencies, while using its point defense systems to carve profanity into the hulls of passing Hive ships. The psychological effect on an enemy that communicated through biological radio frequencies was devastating. But it was the final maneuver that truly demonstrated the difference between human and galactic tactical thinking. When the remaining Hive ships began to retreat, pulling back to consolidate and adapt to the chaotic human tactics, Captain Vasquez ordered her squadron to pursue at maximum acceleration. Captain Vasquez, Reltha called out, standard doctrine calls for allowing enemy forces to withdraw once tactical objectives are achieved. Captain Relthak, Vasquez replied, her voice carrying an edge that made the alien commander's combat instincts twitch in recognition. There's nothing standard about human doctrine. These things killed billions of innocents. They don't get to retreat. They don't get to adapt. They don't get to survive. The pursuit that followed lasted 3 hours and ranged across half the system. The human ships harried the fleeing Hive vessels with a combination of conventional weapons, improvised tactics, and sheer bloody-minded determination that wore down the enemy's adaptive capabilities through pure unpredictability. When it was over, 11 of the 12 Hive ships had been destroyed or disabled. The 12th had been captured, its crew somehow knocked unconscious by a boarding party that had used modified medical stasis fields as weapons. Captain Relthok found herself staring at the after-action reports with a mixture of admiration and horror. The human ships had suffered damage that would have forced any rational crew to abandon their vessels. Defiant's hull was 60% gone, held together by emergency force fields and what appeared to be welding done under combat conditions. Relentless was missing most of its weapons and flying on backup power. Ghost Rider was simply gone, its crew having somehow evacuated to the other ships before their suicidal ramming attack. Captain Vasquez, she said finally, your casualty reports indicate that every one of your ships should have been destroyed. Yes, ma'am, but we weren't. Ow! Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much combat and learned to find peace with impossible odds. Captain, we're from a world that's been trying to kill us since we first drew breath. Every day we survive is a victory against entropy, chaos, and death itself. The Hive thinks they're the ultimate predators, but they made one critical error, which is they assumed that destroying our ships would stop us from fighting. But humans don't fight with ships, Captain. We fight with ideas, determination, and a fundamental refusal to accept defeat. You can destroy our fleets, level our cities, even kill our bodies. But as long as one human survives with the memory of what was lost, the war continues. As the mixed squadron limped back toward the main fleet, trailing debris and carrying intelligence that would revolutionize galactic understanding of the Hive threat, Captain Relthok found herself contemplating the implications of what she had witnessed. The humans had not won through superior technology or greater numbers. They had won by being willing to sacrifice everything in pursuit of an impossible victory. They had turned their own mortality into a weapon that even an enemy designed to adapt and survive couldn't counter. Sir, her tactical officer reported, the main fleet is requesting immediate debrief on human tactical capabilities. Relthok looked at the human ships struggling to maintain formation, their crews working miracles of engineering to keep their vessels operational despite damage that should have been fatal. She thought about the crew of Ghost Rider, who had died not with despair, but with what could only be described as enthusiasm. She remembered Captain Vasquez's voice during the battle, calm and professional even while her ship was dissolving around her. Tell the fleet, she said slowly, that we have discovered something that changes everything. The humans don't just refuse to surrender. They refuse to acknowledge that surrender is even possible. Behind them, the captured Hive ship hung in the darkness, its crew unconscious and its biocomputer systems struggling to process tactical data that violated every assumption in their programming. For the first time in their species' history, the hive had encountered prey that fought back with such ferocity that the very concept of predator and victim had become meaningless. The war was about to change. The galaxy's civilized species had learned to fight like scientists, with precision and efficiency and careful calculation of acceptable losses. But humans had learned to fight like forces of nature, chaotic, destructive, and absolutely implacable. The hive was about to discover that they had made a fundamental error in their expansion strategy. They had assumed that all life would respond to consumption and death with fear and submission. They had never encountered a species that responded to existential threats by laughing in the face of annihilation and asking for more. The hive queen mind experienced something unprecedented as it processed the tactical data from the failed scouting mission: confusion. In 17 million years of expansion across the galaxy, consuming thousands of species and absorbing their technologies, the collective had never encountered resistance that defied fundamental analysis. The Queen Mind's consciousness flowed through the vast bioneural network that connected every hive organism across space and time. Memories of countless conquered civilizations passed through its awareness. The ethereals with their dimensional manipulation, the energy beings of the Void Heart Nebula, even the crystal matrices of the Eternal Archive, all had fallen to the same pattern. Initial resistance, adaptation by the hive, despair, and surrender by the prey species. But these new creatures, humans, had violated the pattern in ways that the Queen Mind's vast intellect struggled to comprehend. Through the damaged biocomputer of the captured scout ship, the Queen Mind reviewed the engagement data. Human tactics made no sense. They sacrificed valuable resources for minimal tactical gain. They exposed themselves to certain destruction to achieve objectives that served no apparent strategic purpose. Most confusing of all, they had continued fighting long past the point where any rational being would have accepted defeat. The Queen Mind reached deeper into the scout ship's memory cores, accessing fragments of human communication during the battle. The translation matrices had captured phrases that defied comprehension. Remember the Alamo, tell them we're Spartans, and, most disturbing of all, laughter in the face of certain death. A secondary consciousness touched the Queen Mind's awareness, the tactical coordinator responsible for fleet-level strategy. Through the biolink, it transmitted its analysis of human military doctrine. The humans fought without regard for acceptable casualty rates. They treated their own technology as disposable, using ships as weapons rather than preserving them as resources. Most troubling, they seemed to derive psychological strength from suffering losses, using the memory of fallen comrades as motivation for greater ferocity. The Queen Mind processed this information with growing unease. Every other species the hive had encountered fought to preserve their civilization, their culture, their lives. When faced with inevitable defeat, they negotiated, surrendered, or simply fled to preserve what they could. Humans fought as if they had already accepted death and decided to take their enemies with them. Through the captured ship's sensors, the Queen Mind observed the massive galactic fleet assembled in the nearby system. 50,000 vessels representing 47 different species, all united in desperate alliance against the hive. Under normal circumstances, such a force would present a significant challenge, but nothing that couldn't be overcome through standard adaptive tactics. But the humans had changed the equation. Their unpredictable methods were already influencing the tactical doctrine of their allies. Sensor data showed alien ships practicing maneuvers that bore the hallmarks of human military thinking: aggressive positioning, acceptable losses in exchange for maximum damage, and a disturbing tendency to use their own vessels as weapons. The Queen Mind made a decision that would have been unthinkable to any previous generation of hive leadership. Instead of advancing immediately to consume the Allied fleet, it chose to study these humans more carefully. If they truly represented a new form of resistance, the collective needed to understand them before committing its full strength. A probe cluster was dispatched to human-controlled space with orders to observe, learn, and report back. The Queen Mind expected to find a typical militaristic species, aggressive, well-armed, but ultimately predictable in their response to superior force. What the probes discovered defied every assumption the Hive had developed about intelligent life. Human space was chaotic. Their governments were fragmented into hundreds of competing nation-states and corporate entities that seemed to spend as much time fighting each other as they did external threats. Their military doctrine was inconsistent, varying dramatically between different cultural groups. Most species the Hive had studied showed unified response patterns developed over millions of years of evolution. Humans showed dozens of different approaches to warfare, many of which contradicted each other. But it was the cultural data that truly disturbed the Queen Mind. Humans celebrated their military defeats as much as their victories. They created art commemorating battles where they had been annihilated. They told stories of warriors who died fighting impossible odds, and these stories became central to their cultural identity. The probe cluster transmitted recordings of human children learning about historical figures whose primary achievement was dying well in the face of overwhelming enemy force. The Queen Mind analyzed thousands of years of human history, looking for patterns that would explain their psychological makeup. What it found was a species that had evolved in constant conflict, not just with external enemies, but with their own environment, their own kind, and the fundamental forces of entropy itself. Earth was a death world in the truest sense. The planet had tried to exterminate its inhabitants through ice ages, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and countless other catastrophes. Each time, humans had not just survived, but used the experience to become more adaptable, more resilient, more dangerous. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world, then somehow found the wisdom not to use them. They had conquered every environment on their planet, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains to the frozen polar regions. They had even begun to conquer space itself, spreading across multiple star systems in the few centuries since achieving interstellar travel. But most disturbing to the Queen Mind was the discovery that humans actually sought out danger. They voluntarily placed themselves in life-threatening situations for recreation. They explored hostile environments for the simple satisfaction of proving they could survive them. They created competitive sports that involved serious injury or death. The probe data included recordings of something humans called extreme sports, activities where the primary objective seemed to be surviving situations that would kill any rational being. The Queen Mind watched humans throwing themselves from aircraft without adequate protection, diving into crushing ocean depths, and climbing mountains in conditions that would be considered torture by most galactic species. These creatures didn't just tolerate mortal danger. They sought it out for entertainment. As the probe cluster continued its observations, more disturbing data emerged. Human popular culture was filled with stories of individuals facing impossible odds and either achieving victory through sheer determination or dying in the attempt. Their entertainment focused heavily on scenarios where protagonists were forced to make desperate choices with no guarantee of survival. Most species the Hive had encountered created art that celebrated life, beauty, and harmony. Humans created art that celebrated struggle, sacrifice, and the nobility of fighting hopeless battles. The Queen Mind began to understand why the scouting force had failed so completely. The Hive's standard tactics were based on the assumption that all intelligent life shared certain fundamental drives: self-preservation, protection of offspring, and the desire to continue their species' existence. When faced with an enemy that could guarantee extinction, rational beings would negotiate, surrender, or flee. Humans appear to lack this rational response to existential threats. When faced with certain death, they didn't surrender. They attacked with increased ferocity. When their offspring were threatened, they didn't negotiate. They became so dangerous that the threat itself became endangered. When their species faced extinction, they didn't flee. They found ways to take their enemies down with them. The probe cluster transmitted a final piece of data that crystallized the Queen Mind's growing alarm. Deep in human space, on a world called Terra, was a monument to something humans called nuclear deterrence, a strategic doctrine based on the principle of mutually assured destruction. Humans had developed weapons that could kill everyone on their planet, then used the threat of mutual annihilation to prevent anyone from using such weapons. They had turned their own extinction into a diplomatic tool. The Queen Mind withdrew its consciousness from the probe network and contemplated the implications. For the first time in its species' existence, the Hive faced an enemy that might actually welcome a fight to the death. Every previous conquest had involved defeating an enemy's will to fight. But humans seemed to draw strength from the prospect of dying in combat. The tactical coordinator touched the Queen Mind's awareness again, transmitting new intelligence from advanced scouts near the galactic fleet. Human ships were arriving in greater numbers, but they weren't following standard deployment patterns. Instead of establishing defensive formations, they were practicing attack runs against simulated Hive formations. More disturbing, they were practicing these attacks at ranges that would guarantee their own destruction. The humans were training for suicide missions. Through the bio network, the Queen Mind sensed the growing unease of its subordinate clusters. The Hive had always succeeded by being the ultimate predator, faster to adapt, quicker to learn, more efficient at converting enemy resources to their own use. But predator-prey relationships required that the prey actually wanted to avoid being consumed. Humans seemed to approach the prospect of consumption by the Hive as they might approach one of their extreme sports, a dangerous challenge to be met with enthusiasm and creativity. The Queen Mind made a decision that would reshape the Hive's entire strategic approach to this conflict. Instead of the usual overwhelming assault designed to crush enemy morale, the collective would implement a new doctrine, systematic escalation designed to find and exploit human psychological breaking points. But even as it issued these orders, the Queen Mind felt something it had never experienced before: doubt. In all its millions of years of existence, consuming thousands of species and absorbing the knowledge of entire civilizations, it had never encountered beings who seemed to treat their own mortality as a weapon. The Hive had evolved to be the perfect predator. They were about to discover that humans had evolved to be something far more dangerous: prey that hunted back. In the depths of space, 50,000 ships prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. The advanced species of the galaxy had built their fleets for elegant warfare, with calculated losses and strategic objectives clearly defined. But humans had built their ships for something else entirely. They had built them to burn brightly in the darkness, to strike back at entropy itself, and to ensure that if civilization fell, it would fall while fighting. The Queen Mind processed the tactical implications and reached a conclusion that chilled its vast consciousness. The humans weren't just willing to die for their cause, they were looking forward to it. They had turned the prospect of glorious death into a recruitment tool, a motivational strategy, and a weapon of psychological warfare. For the first time in 17 million years of conquest, the Hive faced an enemy that might actually be more dangerous dead than alive. The appeal had been made, and humanity had answered. The galaxy was about to discover that when Deathworlders went to war, they didn't just fight for victory. They fought for the right to choose how they died. And in the cold mathematics of survival, that choice might be the one thing that no amount of adaptation could overcome. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since the crisis started, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The Hive had never lost a war. But then, again, they had never fought humans before.